Happy Monday, everybody. Happy 2025, and thank you for tuning in to a third season of Mask Off, a charity movement podcast. I am your host, Kiera B. Gladney, and I am so excited to have an opportunity to build up the kingdom of God through this podcast. I think it's an amazing calling and opportunity to impact the lives of others, those who know Christ, those who are being introduced to Christ, those that are being reintroduced to Christ. It is an amazing possibility to know that something that can be said on this platform can help someone, can impact somebody, can encourage them to want to keep going, especially with everything happening in all of our lives. It takes a community of believers for us to be built up and become mature in ways that we could not ever have imagined. So, thank you for tuning in today. I am ready to have so many guests on, but these first few episodes will be myself and some topics that God has really brought to my attention for this year and to get us in the right mindset. I know that January was a lot of consecration for those of us who are believers, as well as a time of planning and, resolutions. But a lot of times what I found with resolutions is that sometimes there is a lack of strategic planning, thus having a lack of follow through. And so we don't want to do that. So it is not a coincidence that almost a year ago, God gave me these topics, and now a year later, I'm actually doing the podcast with these topics. So there is nothing new under the sun. I truly believe that. And before I get going into the podcast episode for today, I do just want to put into the air, just in case you were not aware, I am a published author, and I have a book called Take Off the Mask, and I released it in August of 2020 after going through different experiences, and God really pressed it upon my heart to write this book so that we could take off the mask of insecurity, the mask of fear, the mask of forgiveness or unforgiveness, all of those things that hold us back from true deliverance and wholeness. And so if you are looking for a book that can give you practical steps to approaching those things that you need to be healed from, I would encourage you to get it. It is available on my website, www.charitymovement.com, or on Amazon. So I encourage you to get it. The link will be in the details as well. So let's get into our podcast episode for today. So you say you're in transition. A lot of us say that we're in transition. A lot of us want to be in transition because we found that some of the seasons of our lives that we have been in have not been the easiest. It has not felt the most comfortable, but that sometimes is exactly where God wants you to be in order for deliverance to take place. So, in case you are not familiar, transition is a noun that means a change or a shift from one state or condition to another. It also is a verb that really describes an act or a change or undergoing a transformation. So when you say transition, that means that you are going through an active transformation to get you from one place to the next. It is not going to always be easy. There are sometimes multiple steps to get to that transition, but there's always a goal in mind. So please keep in mind that when you're talking about transition, transformation, growth, there has to be a goal in mind, okay? So I was going through some daily readings with the rest of our church at Bethlehem Temple of Springfield in Springfield, Michigan. And my pastor, husband as well, he gave us some readings for our consecration. And one of them was Genesis. And we started at chapter 11 and we went through chapter 22. But in Genesis chapter 12, we started reading about Abram, who later became Abraham, who's known as the father of our faith, the father of many nations, all of those things. Okay, Father Abraham, you know that, song in Sunday school, Father Abraham, has many sons. Yes, Father Abraham. So in that instance or that time in history, Abram was told by God that he was going to send him to a land that he would show him. So he did not give him specific time. He did not tell him of a geographical city or town or anything. He just said, get up, take your family, take your things, take your belongings, and go. And while you're going, I'm going to show you a place that will be promised for you, and I will give you many sons, and I will give you all these blessings. And Abram decided to go. And the most amazing thing, or one of the most amazing things about that instance in scripture, is that Abram's family were idol worshipers. So the fact that he could incline his ear to the word of the Lord, and the fact that he had the faith to believe in the word that was spoken to him, and not just think about moving, but getting up, getting his stuff, getting his wife, and moving, and following after God until God showed him the vision. So many times in transition, which is the act or the condition of changing or undergoing a change, we are so held back by fear or worry or doubt or the naysayers that we will stay in the same place. We will undergo the same pressure. We will deal with the same stagnancy instead of allowing God to be God and moving forward in whatever space he wants us to be in. And I don't think that this topic for today is a coincidence, because I'm thinking about transition of being in this place, in this time, in my house, in this city in 2025, and where I was almost 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was in a city that I was very comfortable in. I had a support system. I had a beautiful home. I had friends. I had a job there that I really liked, and I loved the people that I worked with. And I had a community that I really loved, and our children really loved. And we had a lot of support, just a ton of support. But at a certain point, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, my husband and I had to sit down and say, what are we doing? Where are we right now? And in the midst of that, God began to deal with my husband and myself separately and collectively about growth and movement and transition and change. And it was uncomfortable for both of us, because we realized very quickly that God was shifting us, and he was making us uncomfortable. He was making us very irritable in the space that we were in, to the point that we knew we needed to leave. In doing so, it was very hard, because I am an individual. I do sporadic things, but for the most part, I'm pretty structured. I'm structured in goal setting. I am structured in how to get to those goals. I'm structured in making sure that we have SMART goals and tasks and all of those things, because I don't want to waste time. I do not want to be a time waster. I want to really value the time that God has given me. So I don't play that many games. And so I was like, oh man, like this is still technically the pandemic. Our children are very young at the time. And I'm like, what does this change look like? Where is it going to be? And eventually we realized it would still be in Michigan. But at one point we were even thinking, like, what would it look like to move out of the state? And I say that because a lot of times we will allow fear to cripple us. We will allow the fear of transition, to cause us to be in such terror that we won't even go to God and talk to him about it and consult him about it, because we don't want to hear him say go. We don't want to hear him tell us to go. And it causes us to often become disobedient. And then once we don't make that transition and we miss out on it, then it causes us to feel a level of unforgiveness for ourselves. And then that is when we start building that root of bitterness. And once that bitterness starts, it usually like just builds up into hatred and envy and strife. And oftentimes when you see people that are not, they are not happy with themselves, they are not comfortable in the calling that God has for them, they have not embraced who God has called them to be, their personality, their skills, their strengths, their challenges, all of those things. If you have not gotten to a place where you are okay with how God made you, you don't embrace it, you don't appreciate those things, oftentimes it causes there to be a level of jealousy and strife and envy and malice, and then you're wrathful toward people just because they've transitioned and you missed the shift. So, all that to say, getting back to the point of when we were living where we were before we moved to Battle Creek, we were very burned out because we realized there was something more that God had called us to. And it had nothing to do with us not being satisfied or content where we were, but God was calling us to move. And it gotten so clear to us that we went to a service on a Friday night with our children, and there was a prophet there, and he was prophesying to the people in the building, and the bishop of the church called us to the front, my husband and I. We walked up to the front, and the prophet just began to prophesy to my husband and I. He prophesied to my husband first, and then he looked at me and he was like, you know what? The thing that's going to get you is your mind, because you want a level of control. And God is saying that if you don't operate in swift obedience, you are going to forfeit what God has for you and for your husband. And if you walk in swift obedience, God will open up every door that you need, and God will move you both quickly. And once he said that, something broke in me, because I realized that throughout my life, I have searched for stability and security. And obviously we know that we can find those things in God. However, for individuals who have grown up, like myself and many others, you have this, now we call it, like, especially with the Detroit Lions, we call it like Detroit grit. It is a level of grit that you're like, I need to make sure I got it together. I have to make sure that I have it. And it sometimes causes a rift between our relationship with God, because we realize that if I am depending on me, how am I fully depending on him? If I'm still depending on me, if I'm still holding some stuff for me, how am I casting all of my cares upon him? Because I know he cares for me. I know he created me. I know he made me. I know he loves me. But at the same time, I can't do both. And so that really convicted me to repent to the Lord, because I realized that I am not putting my all. I'm not casting all of it to you. I'm holding some stuff back. So in doing so, I am not fully submitting to the transition, because I am not allowing God to show me the state that I'm in and the conditions to change me, because I'm holding some stuff back. And so once the prophet told me swift obedience, I went home and I started asking God, like, where am I going? Where are we going? What are we doing? And once the Lord confirmed where we would be going next, which is here where we are now, I started looking up houses. I started applying for new jobs. I started looking at daycare facilities for our children. And everything just happened so quickly. Like, interviews started happening and house showings started happening and being put on wait lists for daycare services it was all just happening. And it was all just lining up so perfectly. But it was because we were in transition at the right time with God on our side. And I think about Abram and how he did not fear. He did not falter. He did not second guess. He walked in transition. And so many of us sit in these spaces and we are uncomfortable because we will not submit to transition. And I want us to. I want us to submit to the transition because that is how God matures us. That is how he causes us to triumph. That is how he takes us from faith to faith and from glory to glory. There is a transition and we have to do it. We have to submit to it because God is always trying to take us higher. He's always trying to mature us. He's always trying to make us an example for someone else. And if you don't keep growing and moving, you can't then go and help someone else grow and move and mature. Right? What did he tell the church of Corinth? You can't even get on meat because you're still on milk. And ye are yet carnal. I want to be able to transition so I can be mature. And even looking at Abram, who became Abraham, even in the instance where God told him that he would have a son, he was like, well, I'm old, but okay. His wife was like, I'm too old. I can't have children. And she laughed. She laughed at the word of the Lord, and the Lord had to check her. And then she tried to say that she didn't really laugh. And he said, yeah, you did. Don't try to play me. You did. You laughed. And that is how God is. Like, he knows us. We don't have to fake for him. And this is why I wrote the book, Take Off the Mask. You don't have to lie to God. You don't have to dress it up any other way than it is. The reality is transition is scary. The reality is movement, all of those things feel so uncomfortable because you don't know when you're going to get out. You don't know when the trial is over. You don't know when the tribulation will cease. You don't know when the sea will stop roaring. You just don't know. You just have faith that God is going to be in that thing with you. And when we moved to a city where we didn't have any biological family, but we knew that God is and was with us. And we have never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. Therefore, I have confidence that even in my transition, I will have favor. Favor will follow me. Favor will go before me. And those are the type of things that I was praying when we were moving here. That favor is going to follow me. That favor is going to go before me. And that even when I hear no's, I won't feel the rejection. And I haven't. Even in my career. My career when I moved here was made off of no's. Like hearing the no's and saying, oh, I'll check in with you next week. I'll check in with you 2 weeks from now. I don't take no for an answer, in the right situation. Okay? I am committed to the goal in mind, and that's how we have to be with God. I am committed to the goal in mind. I am committed in being what you want me to be and to be who you called me to be. And that's where we build our confidence up in God. So the other scripture that I was thinking about is how in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says, he hath made everything beautiful in his time. A lot of time in transition, just as I said before, we want things to be in our time. We want the blessing in our time. We want the change to happen in our time. We want our family situations to shift in our time. And it's his time. He will make all things beautiful in his time. And so we have to ask God to help us to align our mindset with his timing. And that goes into obedience, because obedience is better than sacrifice. Because obedience is literally a full sacrifice. When you forfeit your mind, how you think, what you want, your will, all of those things, and you conform those things to the will of the Lord, that is a beautiful sacrifice to him. And so we have to continue to learn that is better. That is better in our transition. For him to be glorified, for him to be built up, and for us to be edified because we have chosen to follow him and let him change us and perfect us and mature us and take us to where he wants us to be. So, why is transition so hard to accept? Transition is hard to accept because the carnal mind is enmity against God. We don't want to do anything that our flesh does not like. We don't want to fast. We don't want to pray for a period of time. We don't want to forgive our neighbor all the time. We don't want to forgive ourselves all the time. We don't want to do those things that will bring strength to our spiritual man, and it will consistently mortify the deeds of our flesh. Transition is hard because, as I said about myself, some of us like to be in control. Some of us like to be over everything. Some of us like to know all the details before we even step out on faith. But if you have all the details, are you really stepping out on faith? Or are you stepping out on you? Because if your faith is not tested, how is your faith fortified? So we have to realize that transition is difficult to accept because it means that God is the one leading the ship. We're just in it. We're just going to ride in it. We're going to have faith that we're going to get to our destination. We don't have a map. We don't have an estimated time of arrival. We just trust and believe that God is going to do what he said that he would do. Period. So what is God trying to show us in transition? The easiest way I can say it, God is trying to show us that he's God. He does not need permission to be God. He does not need your opinion to be God. He does not need your approval to be God. He's God. He created us. He created the world. He made the stars. He made the planets. He did all these things. Before you stepped on this earth, he made it. And he made it beautiful. And so it is our responsibility to follow after him, to seek his face and watch how he makes a way. Watch how he matures us. Watch how he brought us from where we started to where we are. And how if we stay in him, he'll take us even farther. And so God is trying to show us how he operates. He is trying to show us what we're made of as well. Because a lot of times we don't know what's in us. We don't know the things that we're being challenged with that we don't even realize. Like some of us are dealing with unforgiveness. And we never would have addressed those things until God illuminated that to us. Even with Abraham, God revealed to him his level of faith, even when he was told to sacrifice his son, Isaac, the promised son. He was told to go on top of the mountain and make a sacrifice, and that Isaac would be the sacrifice. And when he got up there, he lifted up his arms to strike and sacrifice his son, and the angel of the Lord said, wait. God has seen your faith. Now look over there and get that ram in the bush. Don't stab him now. Go on over there and get that ram in that bush that's stuck in that bush over there and sacrifice that, and then, build that altar, get that stuff together. God has to show us what's in us. Because if we allow ourselves to manipulate our brains, we will think we got it all together. We will think that transition in some areas is unnecessary because we got it. Love God. I serve him. I'm good. No, there are things in all of us that God is consistently showing us so that we can get better. We are all in the process of being perfected. So we all have to be willing to go through those transitions so God can continue to make us new and to help us to be better. And so, I was thinking of some different areas of transition and some transitions that I've gone through in my life and how to encourage people that are listening about how to get to the next step or how to keep going even if you feel like you're right in the middle of the storm. And so I know a lot of people talk about that transition between singleness to dating or singleness all the way to marriage. And it is very important that in whatever transition you're in, whether it's a relational, it's job, it's church, whatever it is, God has to be the center of the thing. If God is not your focus, you will not be focused. If God is not your focus, you will not be empowered by Him. If God is not your focus, you will not be led by Him. It is very important that whatever transition you're in, that God is at the center of it and that you have His approval. So in your singleness, you have to be focused on Him. And it's so much more than your chastity. It is so much more than your virginity. It is very important that you hold yourself accountable to being focused on God, that you worship Him, that your actions reflect that you love Him and that you serve Him. So it's easier when you do it in marriage because you quickly realize that the things that you do for your spouse, it is not just for them, because sometimes to you, you might feel like they don't deserve it, but it is unto the Lord. When you serve your spouse unto the Lord, you realize that God is watching the way that you deal with His son or His daughter. And so you treat them and you handle them a certain type of way. You speak to them a certain type of way. You consider them a certain type of way. And if you start that mindset in singleness, it becomes easier to translate in marriage. And a lot of times we misconstrue the emotional toll of these transitions instead of looking at it from a spiritual aspect as well. It is emotional. It's emotional, it's mental, it's physical, all of those things. But we have to remember that in these transitions, God is still in it. Like, He still has to be the leader of the thing. And so it's always something to consider. So from being a party of one to motherhood or parenthood, that's a whole different level of transition. And I could write a whole nother book about that. But it is very difficult for you to embrace transition when you fully don't understand what's going on. And I do understand that. And there's an area of transition that mothers and fathers go through after they've had a child. And then another one after you've lost a child. And that transition is full of mind games and mazes and mental wars, and just it's a lot of things that could become easily overwhelming. But it is very important that even in transition, you have aligned yourself with wise counsel. It is very important that you don't think that you can survive in these transitions with your own strength. And I can remember being pregnant, having my first child, and I felt like I was going crazy. I loved my son. I love my son. And I loved him. I wanted him. I prayed for him and all these things, my husband and I. But when he got here, I just didn't understand why I was not automatically the happiest person in the world. But it is because sometimes in transition, we also have to educate ourselves, okay? You have to educate yourself on what happens to your body after you undergo physical transitions, like having children, all those things, and how that can align sometimes with spiritual things also. And so we have to be prepared when we go through some of these transitions too. That means that we have to look up things. We have to be knowledgeable about where we're going, so that we know what to do. And so that transition from motherhood, it was a lot, because at the same time, I am nurturing a beautiful child, giving so much of myself as a parent. But then at the same time, I was neglecting myself. And at the same time, I still had to remember to nurture our marriage as well, because it's all these things happening in little pods, and I have to continue to keep a hand on each of these things. And so we have to learn how to even bring God into those spaces and ask him to give us direction in those areas so that we don't drop what he has given us the strength to hold together. It is very important that we remember that God has allowed for us, if God has allowed for us to hold these things and to be responsible for these things, we now have the opportunity to continue to hold those things, be responsible for those things, and be successful in those things. And all we have to do is just continue to keep him at the center of it. This is another transition. Okay, this is a transition that I am in, and I have been for a while. So in 2015, God called me to be a minister, to preach. And I was hesitant because I grew up in a family of preachers and singers and musicians and all those things. And I really just did not want to, I don't want to be a hypocrite. It is not my intention, it's not my goal, it's not my dream to be a hypocrite. It is not my aim to be someone who does not do what I say. I don't follow through on the word. Like, that's not my intent. And so I do not want to ever preach a gospel that I don't live, that I don't strive to live. And so I was hesitant because I'm like, God, I don't want to do anything that I could possibly, even a hint of not making your name great. And so God gave me the confidence. He gave me the help, the support. And that is also when I met my now husband. And he was just very instrumental in encouraging me and empowering me to go forth. So fast forward all of that, from being a minister to a licensed evangelist, to being a minister's wife after being married, and now being a pastor's wife. That is a transition because I am a relatively young pastor's wife, and I've been in this position for about a year, and it is a whole new world. I feel like I am learning new things all the time. I feel like I have been training all my life for a role like this, and it is every day very humbling when people want to hear your opinion. They depend on you, they count on you, they look to you, and in turn you look to serve. And I've had some remarkable women that have taken me under their wing and has shown me what it means to serve others without expecting anything in return. And that has helped me my entire life to be a servant and to know that there's glory in that because God sees it and he honors it. And when you bless his people, God is sure enough going to bless you. And it doesn't mean that there's a time limit to that thing and to that level of reciprocity, but just knowing that God honors sacrifice, he honors service, he honors worship, like all of those things are important to him. That is empowering for me. And so that has been a transition. It hasn't really been to being a pastor's wife. It hasn't been a crazy, hard, or difficult transition because I'm married to someone who covers me. I'm married to someone who does not have unrealistic expectations for me. And thus, the spirit of our church is very supportive. It is very empowering for me. And so there's not a huge expectation for me there, other than they always want me to sing. That's the only expectation. But it has been an honor so far. Serving in that transition has been great because they saw us serve before they saw us lead. And I think that's huge in ministerial transitions. The people should see you serve before they see you trying to tell them what to do. The people should see you serving them dinner. They should see you doing something to help the kingdom before you try to give off task to them. That's just my opinion. I'm not a pastor. I'm not your pastor. I'm not a pastor at all. I'm also not your pastor's wife. So just take what I say as a grain of salt. But what I said was, people should see you serve before they see you tell them what to do. And that is how I have transitioned into being a pastor's wife. That is how I've transitioned into being a manager and then a director. Like, that is how I've transitioned throughout my life. That is how I've been raised, is knowing that you have to serve. You have to have a spirit of servitude. You have to have the ability to lead. You have to have the resilience to lead. You have to have the follow-through, the consistency, the diligence to lead. But people will not take you seriously if you don't know how to serve. And so that is where now you see heads of organizations calling themselves servant leaders. It is important that as you lead, you show people what it means to work so that they too can be empowered to work. That is why I'm very excited about our 2025 focus for our church, which is It's Time to Act. God is trying to get us to a place where we move and we're focused and we do His will and we are faithful and we're diligent in the things that He wants us to do. And so in all of our transitions, it is very important that we ask God for grace to access those new territories well. I have found in talking to people, in counseling people, in encouraging people, that there are a lot of people that ask God for new territories and they have not asked God for the grace, the wherewithal, the focus, the consistency to follow through. So when they get these new territories, they get these new opportunities, they get the job, they get the spouse, they get the family, they become overwhelmed because they forgot to ask God for the skills needed to not just possess the thing, but to maintain the thing. And in transition, God will allow you to take these skills, these nuggets of wisdom, and collect all of them together. You can even see it in Abraham, his story in Genesis. I encourage you to read chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, and see how Abram goes from Abram to Abraham and the lessons that he learned, even going through Egypt, the lessons that he learned each step, because all of those things showed him a transition, those nuggets, to where he was growing as he was traveling. And the territory that he was taking, he was also picking up these things that would start to build up his character. And I find that we request things from God. We request new territories, opportunities, these new blessings, and we don't ask God for the skill, for the strategy, so that we can maintain the thing. We have to ask God for grace to maintain it. And so I would encourage you, please don't keep praying for God to enlarge your territory if you have not maintained the things that He's given you. Don't ask God to transition you to a new job. Well, you don't even come all the time to the one you got. What? Don't you do it. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. Please don't do it. Because what you take with you, you will carry with you. What you take with you through this journey, if you don't lay it aside, it will overtake you. I think about it all the time. And even in 2025, I am addressing it. Procrastination, I've taken it from high school to college, getting my bachelor's degree, to college, getting my master's degree. And now in corporate America, I'm like, you know what? That's not effective. I can't do that. I have to be strategic. I got to get it together. And I've done so much better because I realized I can't keep carrying this through these transitions. I've taken it all the way into adulthood, and it is something that I can navigate through, but it is not something that will lead to a sustainable way of leading. And so I have to do better. I have to learn better. I have to shift. And so that transition can be long lasting. And so I gotten some questions that people have asked me about transition. And so I wanted to be able to address those things. And the first question was, what am I supposed to learn in transition? And I think we answered that a little bit. You learn about yourself. You learn about those areas that are strengths for you. You learn about those things that are challenges for you. You learn what you're missing. You're learning throughout that transition how you're growing and what you will see when you get to that full transition. Who is supposed to help me? That is what I talked about with you needing wise counsel, number one. But you also need people that will help carry the load for you throughout that time. And so even when we were moving here, there were people that we leaned on to say, like, hey, can you help me with this before I get to Battle Creek? Hey, can you help me with that? And it was just such great support knowing that we weren't in this transition by ourselves, but God was with us and he was sending people there to us to help us to be better. I preached a sermon on January 31st, which was birthed out of the end of our consecration. And the Lord really pressed upon me that it is important that before we start asking God for a lot of the things that we see. So I know we have vision. I know we have goals. I know we have strategies that God has even given to us. But if we don't seek him, if we don't consistently search for him, if we don't consistently open up the word to really get his mind, to see how he thinks and what he loves, and if we don't tap in on a regular basis, you're seeking the wrong thing. And it's not going to be sustainable. And so it is very important that we seek his face throughout transition so that we can have all that we need to be all that he wants us to be. And so in that, I was telling the saints when I was preaching about how God was going to move swiftly this year for the seekers, for the people who have been diligent, for the people that have been searching for him. God is going to allow us to undergo transitions that we would have not even thought we would have been doing this year because we have sought him. It is very important that we seek God, not just for things, not just for things, not requesting for him to give us materialistic goods, but for us to know who he is for ourselves. And at our big ages, we need to know God for ourselves beyond what our family knows God as, beyond what our friends know God as. I have to know God for who I know him to be. So when I get up before people and I encourage people and I tell them that God is a healer, that he's a way maker, that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him, that he is a heart fixer, that he is a mind regulator, I can confidently say those things because I have tasted and seen that he is good. I have sought him and he has heard me and he had delivered me from my fears. I can testify for myself that God is faithful. And you can only do that when you seek him. You can only do that when you have depended on him, when you have built a relationship with him that is not contingent on what he may or may not do for you. That is the area of transition that causes us to become mature. Even when the path does not turn out the way I always think it will, I know that God's plan for me is still good. And I've experienced things in my life. I experienced loss. I have experienced stress. I have experienced so many things. I've experienced health conditions. I have experienced grief. I've just experienced a lot of ebbs and flows in life. And I have truly learned that at this point, I know God, and He has been consistent, and His thoughts toward me are good and not of evil to bring me to an expected end. So if in these transitions in life, if it does not happen in the route that I think it should happen, if it does not happen in my timeline, it is not because God does not love me. It is not because He does not want the best for me. It is because I am learning something in this journey that I would not have known before if I didn't go through it this way. It is not always the most convenient thing, but if God has allowed me to go through it, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And it just reminds me of a scripture that surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. It's just an assurance that I am going to get through it. And so throughout this year, even if you're going through transition, even if you are undergoing a change that you are painfully navigating through, it may not be pretty, but if God is with you and you have confidence that He is with you, know that you are not alone, and this too shall pass. And if you are not sure that God is with you, this is when you start reaching out to your community, to somebody that can help you, to somebody that can carry you and help you carry that load through your transition. Because if we're a body, we operate together. And that's where you are strengthened. And so I encourage you to think differently about transition. It is something that all of us will undergo. All of us do not undergo it well. All of us do not endure hardness as a good soldier. And so I encourage you to be like Abraham and show the faith that you have in God. Faith that extends beyond logical understanding. Because some of these things that occur just don't make sense. I was just talking about this last week. I would have not imagined myself moving to West Michigan and loving where I live, loving what I do. Like it is just an amazing blessing of God to transition us here and to show us why He did what He did in His timing. Why He allowed us to endure what we endured in His timing. How we have grown and matured from it, and how we're able to help others in their transitions because of what we have experienced. And the blessed part of when you transition with God in mind and it's focused on Him and He's leading you, you will come out of that transition, even if you've undergone things that were not ideal. They were not always positive. They were not always the best. They didn't always feel good and sugary for us. You will leave without the residue of bitterness and unforgiveness and anger and wrath. You won't have that. God will just wash you with His word and consistently make you new and have you showcase the fruit of the Spirit. And you're showing, even in those transitional areas, you're showing love and joy and peace and long-suffering and goodness and meekness and gentleness and faith. You are showing all these things because they reflect Christ in you, even in transition. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that the transition is always going to be happy. I'm not going to say that the transition is always going to be easy. But I am saying that God is faithful and that He can bring you through every transition. I have seen God transition you through postpartum depression. I have seen God transition you from singleness to marriage. I have seen God transition people from heartbreak to wholeness. I have seen it. God is faithful. And there's literally nothing too hard for Him. Nothing. No matter how big it is, no matter how monumental it is, no matter how great the diagnosis, there's nothing too hard for Him. He'll transition you through everything. And He'll help you through everything. And so this year, I encourage you, if you are going through a transition, a change, a shift, and you know it, that you invite God into that transition. I hope that you allow Him to push you to where you need to be and that you don't stop until you hit the finish line. Okay? I thank you for really being a part of this conversation with me and allowing me to talk to you about you being in transition. It is not always the easiest thing, but with God, nothing shall be impossible. So I encourage you to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, subscribe to my podcast, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your evening. And remember that the only one stopping you is you. I'll see you next time.